When this phenomenal monster appeared, everyone inside began running in all directions. Only one person ran towards where Rebecca was standing in mortal peril. Number 3 attempted to attack the bug, but his bladed sword broke apart into little pieces, and the monster straightaway counterattacked whoever dared to get into his way, punching straight through the body of the clone. Because the clone was between the girl and the monster's outstretched limb reached Rebecca's body. The injured girl only glanced back and threw the last look upon the terrified faces of her parents, after which she collapsed and was then on the ground. Number 3, still alive, pulled out a pistol and fired once on the control panel of the security door, on which the warning system immediately declared the commencement of emergency isolation. The monster, in some way, understood from the firing. Number 3 deflected all the remaining energy in his legs and shoved the monster away from the entrance of the bunker, where, in seconds, the emergency lock slammed and the shelter was closed again. Blake stood beside the rescued young man and apologized for showing up so late. Josh recalled that it was this man, who was so unbelievably strong, who was operating the Awakening program, where he acquired his cloning ability. The guy crushed the extended palm greeting him and thanked Blake for rescuing him. In return, the man explained that he saw perfectly well how the young man saved all these people. He was happy that the young man risked everything he had and was willing to die, and didn't leave running, but left all these people on their destiny. When Josh mentioned that most likely nobody would have done anything else, Blake sorrowfully said, looking at the applauding people, that in those circumstances, the sense of fear for oneself wins in the majority. Listening to his new friend, the young man was already beginning to blush due to such high praise. Well, his interlocutor had abruptly altered in his appearance, where it appeared that his thoughts had vanished somewhere far. The actuality was that he went on thinking what he had viewed repeatedly in his mind while he arrived at the site of incidents, where someone stood up to rescue individuals from the consequences of an assault by one of the creatures. Upon this bizarre fellow vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind other than his attire. But the man was preoccupied with this incident by an enormous tiger, which came in front of Josh now. The man received time to reflect about who this man was, who had saved all these individuals and vanished into thin air in the shape of energy. Choosing that this man could possibly provide some solutions, Blake questioned whether he was a hunter, to which Josh replied in the affirmative. After which, the president of the Association of Hunters inquired if he could find out what talent his new friend had. Looking at the man's clear eyes, the young man presumed that Blake saved his life, and thus there was no use being mysterious, and hence he started responding to the question asked by his interlocutor. Suddenly, his appearance underwent a radical change because he suffered an overall loss of contact with his number 3. Irrespective of the consequence for himself, the chap retrieved the cursed sword left at the death of the second from the ground, and after saying sorry to the man crying as he departed, that his family was in mortal danger, the young chap started running. Blake cried after him in vain that it was very risky to go by himself. Using the walkie-talkie integrated into the oxygen mask, the man gave his coordinates to Followed and survivors from here earlier running to the shelter. The young man always heard a voice inside his head that instructed him to shed lots of blood, begin killing and maiming. Feeling sure changes within himself, Josh screamed at the voice from hell to shut up and use his speed skill. Another fireball slammed directly into the head of a monstrous monster, which already destroyed half of the city, but this did not lead to any concrete positive outcome. Then the head of the invading group of hunters commanded to disperse in order to maintain as many warriors as possible in the ranks. One of the members of another group of hunters and a representative of another association attempted to harm the dragon's limbs with his powers, but right away he realized that there were no signs of his blow remaining because the enemy's skin was too thick. Thus, the leaders of groups of various associations had decided that the affair had definitely become tense, and thus it was necessary to make an end to competition and unite. But right away, Somebody's voice behind them caught the men who were just started to talk about group tactics, since it turned out that Norwood Atkinson was the one who, when being asked why he was here, answered that he heard that here someone made an incredible amount of money on him, and now he already started to get stronger and activate his powers in order to fight against the invincible monster. The commanders of the attack groups of hunters observed with fascination and even with some fear in eyes as the head of the most popular association of hunters started to demonstrate himself. True fiery whirlwinds had already started falling to the ground when Norwood uttered something that absolute power doesn't necessarily have to team up with someone in a failing team. Losing contact with the world, Rebecca barely whispered she was in terrible pain, and Donovan attempted to halt the blood seeping from the wound. Gloris, unwinding the bandage with tears in her eyes, requested her daughter hold on just for a bit longer, as they were sure to be rescued soon, and in an instant something slashed across the bunker door. Thereafter, everyone who was cowering there suddenly froze, and in the blink of an eye, the monster ripped the big door that was designed to be able to hold the impact of an atomic bomb, and yet, talking with the voice of a man, went into the survivors who were paralyzed by the terror that overwhelmed their bodies. Rebecca, lying on the ground, whispered to them all to run away, but the parents were not going to leave their daughter to perish all alone and give her body to be devoured by this bug. They were all ready to die when suddenly the air shrieked through Josh's sword that was held between monster and the family, and therefore the monster gazed at the one who so suddenly decided to hinder him from completing his filthy act, and the determined fellow gazed at his rival, turning his head. Donovan was hugely scared by viewing his son, where the facial veins of the young chap bulged increasingly, rendering him increasingly less human. The others who were at the bunker, apart from Josh's family, witnessed new horror, concluding that monsters fought for their right to devour them up. At some point, the savior, taking advantage of a brief hiatus around, looked to where his family remained. There, he saw his little sister, who had her eyes closed for quite some time. The guy just stood where he was and stared at his sister, who had no signs of life. But then, fury and anger overtook his body due to the influence of the cursed sword on his body and consciousness. He charged ahead, attacking a monster who was much stronger and capable than him, and the monster struck back. The bug's punch hit its target, and now the monster already licked fresh human blood from one of its paws. But at the same time, Josh's blood splattered the sword blade and hilt, which instantly had the intended effect. Feeling how new powers were coming into his body, the young man charged at his enemy, but the monster had also a great response, instantly preparing for the blow its clawed paw to the man's head. But the man's blow and the beetle's counterattack were not meant to finish, because Josh's charge was stopped by a great throw made by a girl, and the path of the monster was already obstructed by the Hunter Association's Sapphire. Having flown a couple of meters, the girl landed on the concrete floor of the shelter with the guy on top of her, and joyfully realized that they had made it in good shape. Blake has already started to work with the humongous bug, which just almost killed 2 lives. His colleague, putting the guy on the floor, watched with fear that he had very grave wounds in line with what was occurring with the guy. She right away realized that he had touched his body with an artifact for which his body wasn't prepared to be used yet. Telling him to wait, the savior activated her energy transfer ability, where a magical pattern abruptly appeared together with her hand. Having accumulated an efficient quantity of mana through the use of a magical pattern, the girl forced it into Josh's body with a firm stroke of her hands, while at the same time, his fingers released the cursed sword, dropped from his hand, and his spell began to dissipate. When Bale asked her what she meant by it, she said that the state of this young man leaves much to be desired. She kept attempting some resuscitation when the young man suddenly attempted to utter a word. And afterwards, the head of the association nearby overheard the guy discussing his injured sister, where the face of the man changed in an instant. On the verge of death, Josh pleaded his rescuers to restore Rebecca first. Meanwhile, the monster, which was repelled by Blake, refueled and geared up for the second attempt at attacking a man already in his way. Collecting mana in hand and with sword, informed Josh that today neither he nor his sister would perish. The last thing the man noticed was how his rescuer was headed in the direction of the monster that nearly killed Josh. Seated in his large office, Dong Kong absorbed all that was being spoken of lately in this office. The chairman of the association walked down the corridor with one of his assistants, who continued to brief him on what was happening within the city and what measures were being taken. Abruptly, Norwood came on the men's path, who, speaking with Duncan in a light-hearted manner, said that he would want to remind him. The big man with the old man tried to warn the uninvited guest not to use bad language, but the boss checked this urge by inquiring from the head of the wolves what had happened. Norwood, who was looking at the big man, instructed him to leave them because the discussion did not relate to his little mind. When the head of the association aide left, he replied the guest's question and that he was going to arrange the evacuation of individuals. Then, Norwood noticed that halting the work of the country for 3 months, as well as panic among the populace, would cause the state to finish in shambles in the future. The old man heard very attentively the arguments of his respondent. Afterwards, their economy will not be able to recover, and the nation would be consumed by chaos, where the association will be held responsible for everything, and Dong Kong's own head would come rolling off his shoulders within a month after all production shut down. Nor even sensed that nothing good would occur for him in this situation, and the old man suddenly questioned what the man hinting. And then, Volov had hinted not to say that a breakthrough was imminent, and even more so not to say that the monsters will be level A, where if you just call an emergency without details, people themselves will blame themselves for not evacuating in time. The old man got enraged, screaming to his recipient that in this case, thousands will perish. But the man screamed back that the more die, the more they will require hunters. Then he approached the old man and informed him that he had misjudged him, because on his side, this was not a proposal, but an ultimatum. Left to him, all by himself in the office, the old man had no option but attempt to make a very tricky choice. The young man kept training, performing push-ups on the floor over a dozen times. Above him was Josh, who was eating chips and demanding the clone to train harder, as his increase in muscle mass had sharply reduced in recent times. The fellow comforted himself with the fact that his cloning ability was the best since the clones were serving him, trained up his traits, where this would go on in his life. All of a sudden, there was a ring on the phone by Martin that he already arrived at the location. After waiting for some time, the head of the agency welcomed his hunter. Josh told that number 1 will be hunting in the hare horn hunting area today, and when the agent asked him where number 2 is now, the fellow told that he was training here. The fellow asked a question about why Josh does not train himself, because then development would proceed much faster. Josh more or less consented to the agent. Laziness came over him, and thus he responded that from his viewpoint, it would be more suitable to leave all the work for the clones. The young fellow went on further that he, in fact, never wanted to become a hunter, where he was interested only in the monetary aspect. And when his counterpart saw his high ability where he can turn out to be the best among the hunters, Josh responded that it was sufficient for him to just better his life slightly. And suddenly he felt some sharp object cutting his left collarbone, which was accompanied by awful pain. And the agent who was standing near him and became some sort of undead said that it was because of such beliefs that the guy committed suicide literally a second ago. His whole family came in front of the guy who, by their appearance, already died a long time ago. His parents said that after becoming a hunter, the guy didn't take care of them, broke up with the family, and stayed on foot not far from her parents. Rebecca, from whose chest black blood started to pour, pleaded with his brother to rescue her. This was the last thing Josh had noticed when he awoke alone and leaped onto the bed, still not quite aware that it was a dream. The man looked around cautiously where he found himself in a hospital room, and a warm male voice at once calmed him that there is no need to panic because it was only a dream. Blake, who stood beside him too, recommended the young man not to make sudden movements for the meantime. Only now, Josh could feel how much his left collarbone hurt when it sliced in a battle with an insect from head of the Hunter Association. Payne continued to speak, saying the cut was deep, and the doctors were not making a good outlook, but the guy had been lucky to survive and was still recovering from the nightmare. The young man spoke thanks to the man for rescuing him twice, to which Blake said that he would very much like to discuss many things with the guy, but now it's definitely not his time to do that. And simultaneously, the door of the room creaked open and entered the young man's parents. Josh was extremely delighted to see his parents alive and fine, and not as living dead as in this horror nightmare. When they were asking about their boy's health, Blake came out of the room softly. The doctor came in with the parents and told them that the operation was successful and the wound was healing at a really rapid rate, and in a month's time, the young man would be combat ready. But the guy suddenly inquired about what had happened to the portal and how many days had gone by since the portal opened, and his parents informed him that more than 4 days had already passed where the hunters were able to take care of most top-tier monsters. The young man pulled his brain, trying to recall what had occurred before he eventually lost consciousness, and then it struck the guy where he instantly questioned all the individuals present regarding what had occurred to his dearest sister. But in return, the young man received deathly silence, and the doctor and parents instantly dropped their heads, suspecting the worst. Josh extremely emotionally asked why no one was giving him a clue. Rebecca was in a hospital bed with life support hooked up to her. The guy, watching his sister, was informed that her body is infected with a virus that drains mana out of a human. The doctor described how some monsters are able to be infected with such a virus, where the human body is killed quickly in most instances. The virus is destroyed because it is not compatible with mana, but in rare instances when mana is completely compatible with the viral cell, where Rebecca proved to be such an exception. Shattering the glass with his hand, Josh asked the man if there was any means of curing his sister, to which the doctor replied that according to the present development of medicine, there is no treatment course, where he feels the only thing to do is to continue giving the girl's body mana. But after a fraction of a second, he continued to say there was a narrow chance if the young man could acquire an S-level holy healer, or acquire the hands on a special life-restoring elixir, where Josh couldn't help but conclude that such an elixir would more likely be invaluable to be this scarce and have rare attributes, which the doctor, of course, attested without concealing his disappointment with what was going on. Having finished speaking, the young man still kept looking at his progressively deteriorating sister. He had instantly recalled his own decision to remain behind and assist a stranger rather than leaving with his family, where such a choice would totally alter their entire fate destiny. Rebecca's face still appeared before his eyes, who did not want to let him out, and now she was already gone. So the guy's entire body simultaneously tensed up due to the excess of feelings, and the doctor shouted out in horror when he noticed how the wound opened up and started bleeding. The next thing, something that the young fellow remembered, was that big tiger with him, currently accompanied by a notion that he might have grown stronger at the time of the accident than he would now be capable of easily overpowering all these animals who were more than he could handle. The stiffness in his body did not ease out, and the doctor summoned the nurse and asked the young fellow to relax. But the fellow was bogged down with emotions where he comprehended that he possessed a talent with which he might save all of them, if only he himself put more effort into its cultivation and was not slow. And before his eyes there hovered a vision of that last family dinner when he could feel completely happy. After some time, when the open wound covered, The young man sat on a bed in his room, never pausing, swiping through different thoughts in his mind, his eyes concentrating on careful steps heard from the door to the ward. It was Kiara who greeted happily. Looking at the girl, Josh appreciated the visit straight away, asking whether everything was okay with her family, to which the guest replied that only their house had been burnt, but they themselves had found shelter and escaped alive. And when the fellow inquired from the girl how she had found him, Kiara told him that their fathers had just called. Opening one of the tiny juice bottles, the young man once again thanked the girl for her care, and she prayed for the teacher's quick recovery, stating that they still had much to do together. But then, after all this talk, suddenly the look on the face of the guy suddenly changed sharply, and he requested the girl to hear him carefully. Having regained his power, the young man informed Kiara that he was no longer going to interact with her. 2 weeks from then, the doctor and nurse accompanying him could not believe the speed at which Josh's body completely recovered. The young man himself had already claimed full ownership of his bed, to which he was no longer returning. While getting into ordinary clothes, the young man remembered his last interaction with Kiara, in which he informed her that he would no longer be able to interact with the girl. He immediately told her that this was a result of his sister's condition, not having an idea what to say to this. The young man just requested his pupil to forgive him. The still dazed girl smiled modestly, thanking the young man for what he was able to do. Turning and walking towards the doorway, the girl still could not but notice that Josh somehow did not take a chance to continue their conversation. Without turning her head, Kiara also mentioned that she would apply everything he teaches her in order to enter an educational institution. And when she gets there, she will surely begin dating someone. At last, she turned around and, attempting to smile on her face, announced that there would be no turning back, which the guy would subsequently regret. When dressing up and looking at his parents who stood watch Rebecca's bedside day and night, Josh considered the fact that now he could not afford time. There is no room for relationship or regrets, since the only thing he was concerned about was saving his sister's life. Already seated in the cab of a taxi service vehicle, the young man read about information on who saved his life twice, where he learned very soon that his savior is the head of the Sapphire Hunter Association. And thus, his search and thought were interrupted by a taxi driver who informed the young man that he had already reached his destination, and the young man arrived just at the central office of that very association, whose head rescued his life twice. During the young man was approached by a friendly-appearing girl, who then asked the guy whether she can do something for him. When he informed that he wanted to meet Blake Cedars, the girl promptly asked if he was having an appointment. Of course, no meeting was booked officially, and the girl already wanted to make the guy turn around, but then was restrained by a certain man of very impressive stature, who, coming in front of the young man, asked him if he was Josh Burnett with wide-eyed curiosity and fright. The young man identified himself, and when the girl looked at this thug questioningly, he told her that the young man was a guest of the association, and now he was already inviting Josh to accompany him to the elevator in order to make its way to one of the top floors where the head of their company had been waiting to meet the guy for a long time. A few minutes later, the big guy opened the door, and Josh was able to personally thank his savior. Greeting the young man back, Blake let him know that he was actually thrilled to have him well, even before the doctors ordered them to, and the young man recalled that he was there today only because of his interlocutor. He tried to thank the man once again, but he told him that he simply did what had to be done at that moment. But the young man did not concur with this, pointing out that apart from salvation, medical care, and treatment of his sister were also delivered. And thus, the guy came to a point of asking himself why his savior did all this for him and his family in the first place. Blake settled all hospital bills, treated Rebecca's mana injection, and accommodated her parents in a temporary shelter. Josh was astonished when the man informed him that he also had a sister, and she is missing now. Then, the head of the association continued to comment that in the guy's matter, He saw his own situation, and his emotions got the best of him. And when the man realized that all this owed nothing to the young man, Josh asked why Blake was in search of this meeting rather than an answer. Blake just began talking of the ability of the fellow, assuming the man who saves others and vanishes into thin air to be his clone. To which the young man replied that he did not wish to conceal his ability, which in fact is possession. And then the man came to the point, asking for Josh's assistance in saving a group who had gone to another world under the opes of his guild. Having stood up, Blake said that he was not asking this as a favor for one that had been done, but was simply asking unselfish help equal to that the young man had bestowed on those people in danger. The giant man who stayed in attendance heard his employer ask this young fellow to help, and Blake had already bent head and begged Josh to help rescue his sister and other members of the group. Upon hearing the appeal, the young man thought a while. His thoughts were whisked away to not-so-distant times when he himself had pleaded with this man to save his ailing sister. And thus, he had spoken of how Blake had already rescued his family. Now, it was his turn to rescue the family of his new friend. He informed the already overjoyed man that he would do all he could to assist Josh. Josh just requested that he tell him what he needed to do in order for him to actually be able to help. He got his response to the inquiry as he stood within some hall clad in a training suit and in his hands a wooden sword. Blake informed the young man that this was his association's practice ground where he could employ any of his skills to his extent without dreading to shatter anything. But the fellow did not comprehend why they were doing this training instead of evacuating the team. To this, the man responded that because of his sister's ability, they still have approximately 8 months remaining, and thus it is wise to train to go hiking. And when the fellow savior uttered the complexity of the world where his sister was, Josh got to realize that he was simply not prepared for this job yet. Blake attested guesstimate, but included that there is a method of preparation as fast and effective as possible, and hence, the man spoke out that individuals reveal their best capabilities at the moment of death. In other words, we were discussing making a drastically stressful situation for the body, which equals an instantaneous increase in power. This is what the young man does not have today, where he holds on only because he prepares his adversary in advance good and knows his savior's whole body be consumed by mana. Josh fought hard to repress his urge, but stating that this was the only option. The Hunter Association leader pounced on his visitor. Martin read a series of messages from Josh repeatedly again and again, who had presented him with updates of his hospital stay, wondering whether or not the man would be able to cooperate with him ever again. The man's concentration was diverted by a friendly, familiar voice which welcomed the agent. Turning back, Martin was shocked at how his top hunter appeared. The man didn't even acknowledge the weeping young man heartbreakingly in terror initially. Well, the rather well-battered Josh himself again informed Martin that it was indeed himself. After which, the young man continued to say a lot of things had occurred, where now he would have to sit down and thoroughly discuss with the agent, and within the time frame of the next 15-20 minutes, the young man spoke of all that had occurred since himself and Martin last communicated through the telephone. The man was shocked by the news his hunter's sister had come down with a mana-sucking virus. To the query of his interlocutor, the young man responded that everything was okay with himself, where they told him that mana features are personal for each individual, even among family members. Josh also told that he had taken a position from the Sapphire Association, whose boss had saved his life twice. He also told his conversational partner that his usual number was gone with his phone and required the man to type in the number in his phone book. Martin inquired whether there was a copy of all the contacts that had been left in the missing phone, to which the man reasonably insisted that he no longer needed them, called the head of Hunter's agency, was taken aback by the attitude of the fellow, who requested him to warn his friends, and Josh himself initially thought his incredible student. Hesitantly, he explained that now he could not spare being distracted by something. Martin then shifted his attention to the fellow's wounds, which were clearly gained very recently. The agent actually jumped around when the fellow explained that this was part of his preparation for the task entrusted by Sapphire, and Martin already indicated that he would make a formal complaint. But Josh suppressed his desire, uttering that he himself had acquiesced to this. Then, the young man realized that the younger sister of the association head got trapped in another world in which he, like no one else, could comprehend Blake's desperation. Christening one of his clones, the young man uttered that this day, in the first training session, only he got beaten up. And thus, giving the clone a host of clothes, Jake added that the next time he would confront Blake with the clones. Observing that this guy could not be dissuaded, Martin, blowing hard, declared that then he would purchase more potions of restoration. On the next training session, Josh arrived with one of his clones, but his opponent had already found out that today his guest arrived not single, but with a reinforcement. Shouting that today everything would be completely other, Josh and his friend attacked at the rival. The head of the Hunters Association, Sapphire, offered to them both a good sum, but the young guy did not retreat where he appeared on the next training session with two of his clones. But here, the team could not beat the guy, but the guy's resources did not run out because again he arrived with all his charges, and again it was an embarrassing defeat where the third one even had to be carried in his arms after losing battle after battle. Josh went and met his agent so that he could ask him for a bit of assistance. Sitting down confronting the young man asserted that Blake was too powerful for him. Naturally, because clones are actually very good at replicating movements, he learns a lot, but the traits of Sapphire heads are too large. And while the clones were administering the ready potions, Josh thought that he had to somehow fill this gap in traits. And now, he was already leading the agent to a photograph of what it would be nice to purchase in order to level things out. Martin naturally assured him that he would get it, and his doubts about the safety of the idea were immediately removed by Josh himself once more. The young man came to the training room where, as always, Blake was already anticipating him. The guy had just started greeting his training partner, and then suddenly he was really speechless in real life this time. The fellow was taken along with mutated clones where their owner himself announced that today all would surely be different.